Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
So we sort of finished our unit of, we did biblical theology, we did rabbinic theology, and I said we would talk today about Akdamut, which is the piyut or poem prayer that we say on the first morning of Shavuot, which is tomorrow morning. So this is just the poem from our new Machzor Lev Shalem with its English translation, and it's long. We're not going to read through all of it. We're going to skim it, but we're going to make sure we get to the punchline. And so Akdamut is it's a liturgical poem, and the Hebrew word for liturgical poem is piyut, same cognate word with the Greek word poem or poetry, poet. It's a loan word in rabbinic Hebrew from Greek. And piyut just means a poem written for liturgical purposes. And we're familiar with piyutim, Adon Olam, Yigdal, El Adon, El Baruch Gedol Deah in the first bracha after the Baruch Hu is a short piyut. Tikanta Shabbat Ratzita Korbanoteha in the repetition of Musaf is a short piyut. So this is a long piyut. It's in Aramaic, which might surprise you because most piyutim that we're familiar with are in Hebrew, but there were piyutim that were written in Aramaic in some period of time in late antiquity when Jews understood Aramaic. Scholars talk about various reasons why a piyut might be written in Aramaic rather than in Hebrew, because most piyutim were still written in Hebrew even in that period. And if you said, like, I've never seen a piyut in Aramaic before, I just want to remind you, for those of you who've ever been at a Shabbat table singing Zemirot and you heard the piyut Yaribon, Na'alam Ve'almaya. That's a piyut which is in Aramaic, which sort of stuck. This is one of the few other ones that stuck. It's read on the first morning of Shavuot, just before the Torah reading. There's actually another Aramaic piyut called Yetziv Pitgam, which is read the second morning of Shavuot, right before the Haftorah. We tend not to do that, but that is still done in most Orthodox shuls. And both those piyutim are just Ashkenazi. They're not in the Sephardi tradition. I thought we'd do it today, not only because it's Erev Shavuot, but also because Akdamut actually recapitulates a number of the themes that we've talked about the last month or two in rabbinic literature, rabbinic theology, and I'm just going to summarize that for you. I'm going to give you the overview, right? It talks about God as creator, which we saw in biblical theology, the chosenness of Israel, and distinctiveness of Israel, reward and punishment, which is going to be reward for the Jews, punishment for the non-believers, and the world to come. So some of Larry's favorite themes are here, all in this piyut, and then it culminates with the punchline is, and therefore God gave us the Torah, and that's why we read this piyut right before the reading of the Torah. By the way, originally, apparently the minhag, the custom was that the Torah reader would actually read the first verse of the Torah reading, it's a Torah reading tomorrow morning. It's about the giving of the Torah. So it's B'chodesh hashlishi l'tzeit b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim b'yom hazeh ba'u midbar Sinai. On the third month, after Israel left Egypt, on this day they arrived at Mount Sinai, the opening verse of the Torah reading. Then the Torah reader would pause, chant Akdamut, and then continue with the Torah reading. The Aramaic piyut was still done in Orthodox synagogues before the Haftorah on the second day of Shavuot, Yetziv Pitgam. That is still how it's read. The Haftorah reader chants the first verse of the Haftarah, then pauses and reads the piyut in Aramaic, and then continues with the Haftarah. So there was, of course, with Akdamut, arguments about this in the Halakha and Jewish law about you can't interrupt the Torah reading to read something that's not part of the Torah reading. So some congregations continued to read it that way, but now it's pretty universal, as far as I know, that it was moved to right before the Torah reading. We call up the first Aliyah, right? And then Akdamut is chanted. Everyone with me on that? Are there any questions so far? If there are, you have to interrupt me because I can't see you. Okay. Many acrostics. What makes it poetic? What makes a piyut poetic? Right? Well, in this case, we have an acrostic scheme, which we will look at, and everything rhymes. We're used to rhyming schemes in piyutim, but sometimes they're complicated. This one is simple. Every single word ends with ta, taf, aleph. And there's sort of midrashim about that. It's like the last letter and the first letter. It's like the whole Torah. Although, of course, if that were the case, it would be aleph then taf. We'd say from aleph to taf. Taf then aleph would be a good piyut for, I'd say, Simchas Torah. We get to the end and then go back to the beginning. So that's just kind of midrashic. Taf aleph is the plural ending in Aramaic. Very often, it's the female singular ending. It's also the plural ending. And so it's very easy to use, very easy to find words that end in ta. Let's look at the acrostic first, by which I mean, look, the first two lines start with aleph, bet, gimel, dalid, hey, etc. Could someone say, yes, I see that, so that I know that you see that?
I see it.
Okay, thank you. Zayin, I'm skimming. Don't look too closely. You're going to get dizzy. Pei, tzadi, kuf, resh, shin, taf. Okay, then what? What happens after taf? We have mem, aleph, yud, resh. So the Python's name is what, Michael?
Meir.
Meir. Bay, bet yud. Bear, which is Aramaic. Bet yud, resh, which is Aramaic for son. Bear. Rabbi. Resh. I'm going to go slower. Resh. You see my cursor, right? I hope bet yud. So Meir, Bear, Rabbi. What's his father's name? Michael?
I don't know. I can't read it.
Yud, Tzadi, Chet, Kuf. Yitzchak.
Yitzchak.
So Meir, Bear, Rabbi, Yitzchak. So his name is Meir ben Yitzchak. And what does he do? Yigdal, Yud, Gimel, Dalid, Lamed, Bet. I'm in what's called stanza 5 here, stanza A. Bet, Taf, Vav, Resh, Hey, Yigdal, B'Torah, may he become greater in Torah. B'Torah, what do you think? Ube, Ma'asim. Tovim. So Meir, the author is saying, Meir, me, become greater. May I do more Torah and Ma'asim Tovim. He probably didn't say it that way because he wrote it in the year 1000. I don't think they talk that way. Ma'asim Tovim. Then we have Aleph Mem Nun. Amen. Vav. Chet. Zayin Kuf. Vechazak. Ve'ematz. Vav. Aleph Mem Tzadi. Right? So the whole acrostic is Meir Rabbi Yitzchak. Yigdal. B'Torah. Uv'ma'asim Tovim. Amen. Chazak. Ve'ematz. Chazak ve'ematz means be strong and be strong. From the book of Joshua. Right? So he signed his acrostic. Who is this Meir guy? There's discussion in the sources about who he was. Some sources say he was a teacher of Rashi, because Rashi quotes Rabbi Meir Hechazan. So that would mean in the 1000s, the 11th century, because Rashi died early in the 12th century. And he is said to have been from, I'm sorry, I always say it, Worms. Worms. Does anyone know how to say it correctly in German? Worms. Worms on the Rhine. And there's various legends about there was a disputation between the Jews and the Gentiles lodged claims against the Jews, and the Jews said, wait, let us come up with an answer. And then this Rabbi Meir appeared and answered back against the Gentiles in the disputation and saved the Jews, and then he sort of commemorated his arguments in this piyut. That's kind of a legend, okay? But this does originate apparently in Ashkenaz, and Sephardim do, as far as I know, Sephardim and Mizrahim do not do Akdamut on Shavuot. It's just not part of their tradition. Sometimes there are liturgical things from either Ashkenaz or Sepharad or North Africa that migrate into each other and end up being shared, even though it was written in one place and eventually came to the other place. This is not one of them. This is stayed as just Ashkenazi practice, as far as I know. Okay? Everyone with me? Michael, tell me you're with me.
Yes.
Okay. So just a little bit. And you'll see along the way you actually, understand Aramaic more than you think. By the way, I just want to say one brief thing about the melody. I'm not a chazan. I am not trained in the history of chazanut, but I believe this is probably called something like Pilgrimage Festival Major Mode, Shalosh Regalim Major Mode, because the melody is Akdamut Milin V'Sharayut Shutaha Azla HaShakelna Harman Urshutaha, which is similar to Kiddush. Asher Bacharvanu Mikolaha V'Romamanu Mikolashon V'Kiddushan V'Mitzotaha da 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 da, and it's the same melody as what do we say on Simchat Torah, which is a special piyut before the Torah reading, near the end of the Torah reading. We call up the Chatan Torah and the Chatan Breshit, and it's the same melody. Birshut Adara Gadol Vanra Amod 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 so and so Chatan Torah da 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 da. So Kiddush and Akdamut and calling up the Chatan Torah and Chatan Breshit on Simchat Torah, as far as I can tell, without any cantorial training, is the same melody. So I'm guessing that it is some sort of, Shalosh Regalim, 3 Pilgrimage Festival major mode. They call it, cantors call things like that, major mode. Okay? Not minor mode. Okay, so Akdamut, the beginning of my words, and I ask permission. I'm going to ask permission. Very often a piyut says, please let me speak. And I love this last line, this next line, Bivave Trei Utlat, with 2 or 3 verses, which I will open with trembling. And that's like I don't think it's meant to be a joke, but of course, right? Whenever a speaker gets up, a long-winded speaker, and says, I'm just going to say a few words, everyone knows, uh-oh, you better settle in and get comfortable. So he says, I'm just going to say 2 or 3 verses. Bivave Trei Utlat. Bave is a bava, literally means a gate. And we're familiar with the tractates in the Talmud, Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Batra. And bava literally means a gate, but figuratively it can mean a section or a stanza. So here it means I'm going to open with 2 or 3 stanzas, okay? And then I'm going to start out talking about God who creates, okay? Gvuran Almin Le. God has all the powers in the world, and I can't possibly describe it. I couldn't possibly describe it even were all the heavens parchment and all the reeds in the world were pens and all the waters, all the oceans were ink, which I believe became a name of a popular Jewish book a few years ago. And everyone on the earth was scribes, right? Even if I had all the monkeys on all the typewriters in the world, we couldn't possibly complete describing God's awesomeness. Okay, so we start with God is great. You'll forgive me. Allahu Akbar. That's what it starts with. Okay, that's what that means. Okay, and then it gets to creation. He created this whole world, accomplishing it all in 6 days. Zemin kol avidate behach yomei shita, which means he prepared all his work. Avidate is like avodato, his work. In these yomei, these days, shita, which means 6. And he went up to his fiery throne. By the way, this Aleph and Bet is just artificial stanzas that our editor of this Siddur puts in to break it up because it's long. Or you might say, oh, in synagogue this year, we're just going to do stanza 2 or something like that. And he did try to break it up with some reason. Okay. So I will start stanza 1, not really stanza 1, but what our editor, I think it's Rabbi Ed Feld, said is stanza 1 is, I'm going to open my words, just going to say a few words about God who is great, who created the whole world. Stanza 2. If you were in the Siddur, not Sim Shalom, what do you call Shir Hadash, the new one, we're now going to page 414, starts on page 413. I should have said that earlier. Okay. It's, and by the way, it's in the Sim Shalom. I'm not sure it has a full translation in the Siddur Sim Shalom. Okay. Now we've talked about God who went up to God's throne. And now we talk about the realm of the throne. And we remember for the first blessing of the Shema, what's happening in the realm of God's throne way up there? Is anyone up there with God? I asked the congregation.
Angels.
And they're called, Srafim, and they're called Ophanim. And what do? They sing in choirs and they praise. And remember when we studied that section, the first blessing after the Shema, the seated Kedusha and the standing Kedusha, we said that this is based on Isaiah's vision of the angels who say Kadosh, 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 and Ezekiel's version of the angels who say Baruch Kavod Hashem Imkomo, and the Kedusha is this whole narrative embroidered around that. And here we have a whole story of the angels, thousands, tens of thousands, newly born each day. This is kind of a rabbinic, midrashic idea that angels exist only for a day, only to praise God once, and then they disappear. And they sing loudly, the roaring, Ophanim, okay, and basically they praise. Okay, so God created the world, then God is on God's throne with all the angels praising. Okay, a lot about the angels. Stanza number 3, what our editor says stanza number 3, is still really about the angels. Okay? And it's more about the choir of the angels. That's it. All right? Stanza 4. So stanza 2 and 3 are all about the angels. So this takes us up to the realm, our imagination, up to the realm of heaven, and elaborates on themes that we read about in the seated Kedusha, the first blessing of the Shema before Baruch Hu, right? About we imitate the angels praising God, and in the Kedusha itself, in the Amidah, and the Amidah, both Shachrit and Musaf. And remember, we have the third Kedusha right before Aleinu in Uval Etzion, in case people missed the first 2 Kedushas, right? So now we have a long, poetic, elaborate description of what Kedusha talked about, which is there's a heavenly realm where there are angels, and what do they do all day long? They hang around and they praise God in a choir. Okay. Now I'm up to stanza Daled 4. Okay. So this praise, the praise of the world's master just expressed, by the way, Shin, Shavach Ribon Alma, master of the world, which is Yaribon Alam in the Shabbat song that we sometimes sing, right? Ribon, which is Hebrew for Ribon Ha'olam. We're familiar with Hebrew prayers that sort of start like Ribon Kol Ha'olamim, master of all the universes. Okay? So they said the Shevach, the praise of the master of the universe that they had just had. I would now say, Shvar alai l'chavoye, it is nice for me to say this, be'apei malkevata, in the face of all the kings. Who are the kings here? These are the kings of the earth. So the praise of the angels that they just praised God, I would echo this praise in saying it to the kings of the earth. The kings of the earth, here's actually kingdoms, malchuyot, I guess. So the kingdoms come and they assemble and they ask, quote, Man menan uman hu rechimach. Who is your lover? Who are the nations talking to? Who might they be? What do you think? I'll give you another hint with one more line. Who is your lover, for whose sake you die in the lion's den? So who are the nations talking to?
The Jews.
The Jews. All right. So who's your lover for whom you are persecuted? Remember this coming from the 11th century in Ashkenaz. At the same time or just before, the Crusaders on the way to conquer the Holy Land decided to slaughter the Jews along the way to help get their spirits up. All right. So the Jews had it rough in Ashkenaz in the early Middle Ages, in Franco-Germany, in Western Europe. Okay. So the nations are saying to the Jews, who is your lover for whose sake we are persecuting you all the time? Right? Sorry, I'm jiggling there. Bottom of page 4, top of page 416. I'm trying to get it right. We would be honored if you would join us, meaning stop being Jewish. We want you to convert. Okay. And so how do we answer her? That's Israel. Okay. Her wise response describes the end of days. Would that you knew God in a genuine way. I think our translator tries to rhyme once in a while. Okay. So Israel says, well, let me tell you about, I believe the line is, I'm going to tell you how it's going to be. All right. What is the worth of your greatness today? Israel says to the nations, compared to what awaits me when God's deliverance comes. God's deliverance comes. What's going to happen? On me and mine God's light will shine, but you shall be covered with shame as God's glory is revealed in all its power and pride. Okay, so right now you're persecuting us, but I'm going to tell you how it's going to be in the future, which is going to be the end time, Olam Haba, the world to come. Okay. When God's deliverance comes, we're going to get the glory and you're going to be covered with shame. For then God will repay haters and foes. I've been telling my friends lately, apparently the word haters, which we use colloquially, has now made it into Israeli Hebrew. And they use the phrase, ha-haterim, the haters. So if you bump into an Israeli, you can cluck and shake your head and talk about the haters and say, ha-haters. Okay. So in the end time, God is going to repay all the haters and vindicate this nation, beloved as a bride, which of course is us. Okay. And we are called in Hebrew, Am Chabiv, beloved nation. If you see my cursor there, Tzedikta la'am Chabiv, the vindication of this beloved nation. And then there will be celebration in Jerusalem, like a wedding canopy, and everyone gets rewarded. Okay, so that's why we're not joining you, because the situation as it appears now is just temporary. It's eventually going to be different, and in the future time, you will see we will be the ones who are going to be rewarded. And then we have elaborate descriptions, repetition of the rabbinic midrashim that we read the last couple of weeks about what awaits the righteous in the world to come. Hey, right? Paragraph hey, near the bottom of page 416. Where does everyone get to sit? On couches of pure gold in 7 rows, and they're facing God. So God is like the teacher in front teaching Torah. We're all sitting in rows with beauty. What's a little, in the Garden of Eden, top of page 417. And what do we do in the Garden of Eden? We do a circle dance. We'll dance the Hora. Okay. By the way, just looking at Garden of Eden, first line in Aramaic at the top of the page. I hope you can see my cursor. Bigo Eden Ginta. Bigo means in the midst of. In the midst of Eden, the garden. Okay. Circle dance. And what do they do with the circle dance? They point to God and they say Danehu in Aramaic, which means Zehu. This is the one. When in the Siddur, quoting something from the Bible, do we say Zeh? Does Zeh resonate with anyone? Song of the Sea, when we say Zeh Eli V'Anvehu, and the Midrash, if you remember, says that people saw God at the Song of the Sea, was revealed differently to everyone, and everyone said, Zeh, this is the one. We all saw God. We pointed. Okay? So in Gan Eden, the righteous, are going to point to God and say, in captivity, we lived, we survived for this purpose. And then, favorite mythological theme of the future times, there will be, what's the word? What did the Romans do in the Colosseum? Not the gladiators. Animal. There's going to be animal combat between Leviathan and Behemoth. Both of them are mentioned, by the way, near the end of the book of Job in the nature poetry, that God sports with Leviathan and Behemoth, which kinds of means, I don't know. A mythical giant whale will fight a mythical hippopotamus or something like that. Okay. The dragon will fight something else. All right. So, you Gentiles, the implication is, you had your sports, but in the future times in Gan Eden, we're going to get that sport also. Okay. And then how does the battle end? Their creator approaches them with sword unsheathed, serving them up to the righteous a delicious feast. Remember, we talked about one of the midrashim that in the world to come, the righteous will be served a feast, a barbecue of Leviathan. Anyone remember what's going to happen with the skin? What's the skin going to be used for in the midrash? You're going to answer that question. It's going to be used to make come on, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Sukkah, right? So the meat, nothing is wasted, of course, right? So the meat is served, the skin is going to become a sukkah. That's not in this piyut, the skin, right? So, and we're seated at tables made of rubies and jewels and cups overflowing for wine preserved from creation. Okay, so just imagine the Paitan, the poet or the Chazan, chanting this in Ashkenaz in the 1000s while the Crusades are brewing up, saying to the Jews, we're persecuted and people challenge us and say, like, why do you stay Jewish? Why don't you join us? But, that's okay because this is just how the situation looks now. But don't worry, in the future time, we will be rewarded. And now we're up to this last little stanza called Vav. O you upright, as the praise in this song has just expressed, your place is assured in this great congregation. This is the Chazan, or the Paitan, the poet, actually speaking to the Jews who are gathered. So you people who just heard me tell this tale, by the way, just have to imagine these are like, peasants. I mean, what were most people? Laborers, simple peasants, farmers, in shul. Okay. And here is this storyteller spinning tales of heaven and what awaits people. And, of course, I think of it as the Christian version of this is, the magnificent soaring churches, right? We didn't do that. We used words, right, to construct what eternity is like. The churches gave the Christians, I think, the feel of what eternity is like. They're soaring vast spaces and beautiful windows, right? You're a peasant and you're poor and you live in the mud, but here is a symbol of the magnificence of divine eternity. We did that, the Jews, in words, not so much in art and certainly not in buildings. So now the Paitan brings it home and says, we're sitting right here in shul, so I said to you, just your place is assured in this great congregation, which, is double entendre, right? This great congregation is this group of Jews gathered here now, but also this great congregation on high, which I just told you about, which is going to happen in the future times. Okay. And why will you merit to be there? What's going to be your guarantee that you will be found worthy? I hope people can see my cursor. For you obeyed the divine words uttered in glory. You want to get to heaven, this place that I described with the tables of gold and the wine from the days of creation and the delicious Leviathan barbecue. Okay. It's because you're going to be found worthy because you listen to the divine words. Miromam hu Elohim bikadmata uvatraita. God is elevated from the first to the last. Sivi ve'itra ivan. God loved us. Umisarlan oraita. And gave us the Torah. Okay? So basically, I think I'm going to stop sharing now so I can see it all. Okay? So basically, this is then, at the end, the perfect lead-in after all this magnificent, I'm going to call it, constructing a cathedral. That was my word for church. A cathedral out of words, a cathedral about eternity to these humble peasant farmers who are assembled on Yom Tov, who have to deal with their challenging Gentile neighbors all week long. The Paitan, or the poet, and the Chazan chanting, it gives this magnificent vision of what awaits us for being loyal. You want to be in that group. That is, you got to be loyal. That is why God, who loved us, has given us the words of Torah. Perfect lead-in to the Torah reading on the first day of Shavuot, when we will read the story. We're about to read the story of the giving of the Torah at Sinai, the Ten Commandments. Okay? So, whatever you think about the theology, my point in the other classes for the last year have been helping you construct your individual theology. Today's class is one of those classes that is not about that. It's just a one-off. It's just, let's look at a thing in the liturgy so at least we understand it. Okay. It's 8:49. I'm going to pause just for a minute or two. Are there any questions, thoughts? Bernie?
When was this incorporated into the Shavuot liturgy?
Well, so the interesting question, of course, is, was it actually written for the Shavuot liturgy? The only thing that links it to Shavuot is the last line of giving of the Torah. So either it was written for Shavuot, okay, or it wasn't, but because the last line is giving of the Torah, someone decided it belonged on Shavuot. I will tell you that there are medieval sources that say, and medieval means, I can't tell you what, I reviewed this last night, but I think by certainly 12th, 13th century, that say, and there are congregations who on Shavuot recite this piyut. And it's not recited anywhere else. It's not in any book of poems, right, that someone decided to stick here. So it was probably written for Shavuot. We don't have proof of that because there's nothing else that says Shavuot in it. But it seems to be universally accepted in Ashkenaz that this is a Shavuot piyut. So reasonable to say either it was written for Shavuot or very, very early on it was attached to Shavuot. And it's not recited any other time. It's not collected any other place. It's only referred to as the piyut, which is read before the Torah reading on Shavuot. So very early, and quite possibly that is maybe its original place. It's very interesting because you would sort of think, I don't know, you might think if I were writing a piyut about Shavuot, I might say a little more about Shavuot. 7 weeks, we've been counting. You'd think a poet would throw in a little bit more to anchor it to the holiday. Dairy, I don't know. And the only thing that anchors it, and doesn't say anything about holiday, right? All it says is really the tail end. You are loyal. You're going to be, that's what I was thinking of. When the saints come marching in, oh Lord, I want to be in that number, right? So this is the poet's version of, oh Lord, I want to be in that number. I want to be in Olam Haba, eating on the gold table at the end of time, even though I'm beaten down and downtrodden now. The poet is saying, okay, you want to be part of that congregation. That's why God loves you and gave you the Torah. When we're about to now read that story of the giving of the Torah. So it seems that the link to Shavuot is early and possibly original. But it is interesting that the Piyut does not say anything more about the holiday. Just says God gave us the Torah. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Okay, I hope at least whatever your theology is, I hope if you go to shul tomorrow that you hear Akdamut, that you now feel you understand Akdamut better than you did before. And again, Akdamut just means beginning of, right? So it's just like books of the Torah. It's just the prayer is called colloquially by the opening word of it. It's not necessarily that the title means anything. If you were giving a topical title, you would tell it, you would just call it, Israel's chosenness in receiving Torah or something like that. That would be from Israel's chosenness in receiving Torah from God, the master and creator of the universe. That would be the long topical title, but it's just called Akdamut from the first word, just like, we say, the book of Breshit or Vayikra just means, and he called. That's all it means, right? It just happens to be the first word of the third book of the Torah, and that's how the whole book gets to be called that. Final question, comment?
I just have a
Larry?
comment. Usually by the time we get to that, I'm straining to stay awake because I've been awake all night. I'm desperate to finish the service and go home, and I'm just hoping whoever's doing it is going to read it very quickly.
Okay. Especially, and it's easy to be lulled to sleep because it's a repetitive melody that goes over and over. It goes over and over. It goes over and over. By the way, the ta, sometimes, there are people who sometimes join in on the ta. So it's kind of that's not the official way of doing it, but that's kind of a way that, people sometimes stay awake. It's always helpful when you have, a long passage in an obscure language that no one understands and no one understands what it's about and why we're doing it. It's always helpful to have a little audience participation part that kind of stimulates people enough to stick with it. So on this, the 49th day of the Omer, I wish you all a Chag Shavuot Sameach, good Yontif, and I can't remember how many weeks. I think we have maybe 4 weeks, but we will resume after American Independence Day, after the 4th of July. And I hope we return to our class on Jewish theology and move forward to the Middle Ages, right? We did Bible, we did Rabbinic, onwards to the Middle Ages, and then modernity. Okay.
Should we count with a blessing?
A blessing.
Should we count the days to our next session with a blessing?
A blessing up until, sure. I think it's 4 weeks or something up until our next, count down the days, mark X's on your calendar until the next Siddur class. Until then, Chag Sameach, stay healthy, be Torah.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.